Picture, if you will, a decade where peace and love were the rallying cries. Yet beneath the surface, a darker current seemed to flow during a time when the quest for states of higher consciousness intermingled with the occult, as the counterculture danced dangerously close to the edge of the abyss. Welcome to an alternate view of the 1960s here on Things Visible and Invisible. Gary, the last time we spoke, you gave a very interesting, a preamble to where we're heading on this mystical journey through the real magical mystery journey of the 1960s. You talked about various occult writers or pretend writers maybe in Paris writing about all sorts of occult and sensationalist ideas. And then we had the re-emergence of interest in Aleister Crowley as an unlikely hero for hippies, especially given his hairstyle. So the question really now, Gary, is how does this kind of ragbag of ideas and loose philosophical notions, how does it start to enter the bloodstream of 1960s popular culture?
Well, as I said, it's initially mostly through books, and I guess we would say now is a meme got kind of picked up and then spread. And as I say in the book, there's and again, one of the things I notice is you have similar sorts of themes appearing in different bits of the popular culture. So let's say the rising youth culture. Okay, so in I think it's late. The film is like about 61. I think the novel came out in 57 or something like that. It's the book is called The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham.
Yep.
But this was made into a film called Village of the Damned. It's one of the last films George Sanders was in. And the premise is there's sort of a strange meteor shower, and suddenly all these women who are still virgins are pregnant. And this causes lots of problems in the neighborhood, a variety of other reasons. But then they have the children, and they all practically look identical. They all have this blonde hair. I always say they look like Brian Jones when he was in the Stones. And they're maturing very, very quickly. And on top of that, they're very, very intelligent, and they have psychic powers, and they have one mind. So these weird on their way to being teenagers, pose a threat, to the established generation, and that they must be done away with. So that's that. And then not too long after that, the comic book, the X-Men, comes out, which I think is 1963. And again, these are teenagers with strange powers that the normal people, the straights or the grups, the grown-ups, just find very threatening and all that. All right, so so they have the film, a novel, film, comic book, and then you have the actual hippies, the real live hippies, the first ones who called themselves hippies and identified hippie before it became a pejorative kind of term or just a characterization, in Haight-Ashbury. And they were calling themselves mutants. Mutants, know you are here, and all this, come out. There was like the famous, Declaration of Independence. I forget how it is. Declaration of something independence, when the day after, or very soon after, LSD was made illegal in the state of California, they had this event where everyone came out and took the sacrament and all that. And it was like that was the red line. That was the crossing. So that's 66. Okay, so that's before Sgt. Pepper's comes out. But again, there's all this. It's there, and then you have. I not too long ago, I did a radio show for the BBC about the counterculture, and I said there isn't a counterculture today, or there's many counterculture, because but back then there was one alternative culture, there was one alternative other kind of thing, briefly for a time before it all kind of out. But that was like the red line. Okay, now it's us. We've come of age, and again, science fiction, Childhood Zen, that novel by Arthur C. Clarke. There's another theme where this generation is born, And it turns out that the previous generations are just sort of the mulch out of which the true human is emerging, and takes off for parts unknown and all this kind of thing. So.
Well, why do you think, Gary, that because it's very interesting the picture you're painting there, and you're making me think of all these converging elements at this moment. I mean, was it a case, though, that the kind of youth culture, which had developed from the late 50s onwards, both in the United States and across Europe, do you think that was the sort of seedbed for all these ideas to really that these ideas were really for young people, and by young people I mean sort of people in their teens or early 20s. They weren't ideas that were permeating, oldies, people in there working for a living, etc.
No.
Was it a case that this counterculture and everything that flowed and has flown from it couldn't have happened without the initial kind of, I'm going to use a shorthand here, but the sort of rock and roll generation that emerged from the late 50s onwards?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, the beginnings and ends are the bêtes noires of historians, right? There's always another beginning. I mean, ends are sort of there's always another beginning. Yeah, it was like the Beatniks and the rockers. This stuff is permeating. Say with the Beatniks, you have Alan Watts and Zen, the Dharma Bums, Kerouac's novel, Gary Snyder, and also so you have this Eastern influence coming in. I say mostly from Japan, mostly Zen and Buddhism, rather than it's sort of Hinduism with George Harrison and Hare Krishna and that kind of stuff. But you have earlier it's that the books of D.T. Suzuki. And then the rock and roll. Well, I tell another weird. I mean, let me just break off for a second. There's a kind of metaphor or something I use when I think about this. So if you when there's a solar eclipse, and there's the corona, right, that's around and all that. So if you think of that, so if you think of the blacked out sun bit as, I'm mixing metaphors. It's not really mainstream, but sort of the center average, everyday kind of normal culture kind of thing. And around it is this, what I would call the corona. And this is all the stuff that doesn't fit in. But these things don't necessarily connect with each other immediately. They're different, but they find themselves in the same place together. And sometimes they wind up getting together and all that. And I think this late 50s and early 60s times, that was one of the times it started happening. And one of the kind of, I would say, agents of this sort of strange crossover between, say, rock and the occult and a kind of transgressive culture is the filmmaker Kenneth Anger. His films, Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome and Scorpio Rising and the Lucifer Rising and all that. But Scorpio Rising has all this weird biker imagery, mixed in with transgressive sacrilegious acts in the church and weird occult kind of stuff. And he was into Crowley. I mean, Anger was in touch with this gang in Pasadena, I mentioned before, this Jack Parsons, gang of Thelemites, the gang of Thelemites. No, this magical group there who were keeping Crowley alive, and he was in that whole kind of world. Marjorie Cameron was Parsons' widow, and she's in Anger's film. So again, that's another thing too. There must be a book about this. This weird kind of Hollywood weird stuff going on that people like Dennis Hopper would sort of talk about in the background, or Peter Fonda or somebody like that. It's weird kind of background of LA, like weird occult, strange LA. So that's another kind of story.
Well,
Manson. Sorry,
well, before we get to Manson, which may be where we're heading, but the 60s. And you alluded to it earlier. Unlike today, even with some of the largest media celebrities in the firmament, they are nothing compared to the sort of characters of the 1960s, because there was really so little celebrities around and so little media around that people like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones were on a different planet. But talk to me a little bit about how these rather sort of fringe ideas started to infiltrate. For example, let's stick with the music industry, something you know very well. In the 1960s, how did that start to penetrate into some of the biggest bands on the planet?
Well, I mean, it's just osmosis. I mean, there's, I mean, I shouldn't say, if you want in sort of, what do you want to say, like on the surface, let's say, the Beatles are more, as I say in the book, the Beatles are more mystical, right? And the Stones were magical. So the Beatles it's the Hare Krishna, they were with the Maharishi and all that. I mean, all the while, they're reading the stuff about Crowley and magic and all this kind of thing. And it's what people are doing. It's what's being passed around by the counterculture. So it's in the zeitgeist and all that sort of thing. But I don't want to say ostensibly, but I mean, just like, what they were seen to be as being involved with the Maharishi and the mystical kind of stuff and all that. And as I said, there's Crowley on the cover, Aldous Huxley, C.G. Jung, and there's, I forget their names right now, but there are two Swamis on the cover as well. And George Harrison got very, very deeply interested in that. Hare Krishna. Lenin played around with it for a while, but he was kind of an intellectual impulse buyer, and he's kind of like picking lots of stuff. And later it's Arthur and things like that, and so on and so on. So, but this fellow Kenneth Anger, he comes into the Stones orbit in sort of the 67, 68, and he's a product coming out of the Haight-Ashbury scene in San Francisco, and he was. Famously, there's this place called the Russian House, and there's all sorts of weird goings on happening there, dark ones and things of that sort. And Kenneth Anger's there, Anton LaVey, who's the the Church of Satan guy, and all that. This is just there in the background. And but he comes over here, and his films are known over here, and people know him from his stills from the films being shown in art galleries and stuff like that. And he comes into the Stones orbit, and they're really into it. And Jagger, he has a relationship with Jagger, but it's Keith Richards who really becomes kind of his mate, Anita Pallenberg and all that. So there's those stories about them, doing spells with him and that kind of stuff. But Jagger does the music for one of his weird films, Invocation of My Demon Brother, which is a short, 10 or 12 minute film that used to be played at one of these midnight, films like Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain, and later on films like Pink Flamingo, but they're outrageous for different reasons. So it's the art world too. So it's these days, people talk about occulture, which is this, portmanteau word of the occult and culture. And that starts today. Now that starts getting bandied around about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And that's mainly because a lot of artists got bored with old postmodern irony and that kind of stuff. And they started doing a kind of serious painting in the way of incorporating the kind of real serious practitioners of magic doing real serious spells and stuff, in the sense of all of the necessary impedimenta and everything down to like very fine tune. So I mean that kind of bled into the art world. So we got magic going today, contemporary, but it was going on back then. But it was during that, again, it's a crossover kind of thing. You have art, you have weird magic stuff, but we all know that Kandinsky and Mondrian and other people like that were interested in theosophy and all that kind of thing. So it's not news really, but then it becomes kind of, this is a place where these things can bleed into each other.
And of course, at the same time, I mean, you mentioned Hollywood and what was going on. Hollywood, totally, from my reading of it, out of the blue, we have Rosemary's Baby, which is up until then, Hollywood's horror movies were, if not parody, they were kind of comedic or whereas Rosemary's Baby, nobody could ever suggest that was comedic, and by a very up-and-coming director and all that was attached to it, treating the subject very seriously, but also with a kind of almost with a knowledge which hadn't been seen or witnessed before in films at that time. I mean, is this part of this kind of, as you said, the zeitgeist that on all these different fronts we seem to be, for want of a better expression, saturated with the occult by the end of the 1960s?
Well, yeah, I mean, Rosemary's Baby is one of the key ones, and I would say the end of the film is, an epiphany. I don't know if it's quite the right word, of like what, in some ways, what the '60s was. It was embracing the dark side.
Yeah.
Everyone's seen the film, so it's not a spoiler. She has the baby, but she loves it. So she is. So it's, and it was this again. It was an antinomian time when the distinctions between good and evil, Nietzsche's much abused term beyond good and evil, had broken down. And this is part of magic practice or Gnostic practice, in the sense that, the Gnostics were an early Christian sect that sought true knowledge, experience of that kind of experiential knowledge of the spirit,
Yeah.
and they weren't literalists like the Petrine Church. But they kind of turned it around. It was kind of a reversal. So like Cain was actually a hero, not Abel, and things like that. So one of the sorts of things. So that kind of turnaround was going on in the '60s as well. And the weird thing about that, by the end of the '60s, it's even in the politics. It's when we think about occult politics, it's always the right. It's always the far right and all that, Julius Evola and people like that. But actually, in the 1960s, it was the progressive left, the very far left. There's the farcical and famous story of on the march, the anti-Vietnam March of 1967, the attempt to levitate the Pentagon. It's like 12,000, hippies, whatever, were trying to hold hands to. Somebody did the math and thought we need about, I think it was 1,200 or something. No, not 12,000, 1,200. We need about 1,200 people. So they got that many. But the guards said, no, we can't let you encircle it. But if you want to levitate it, just go ahead, be our guest. And Kenneth Anger and Norman Mailer and Ed Sanders from the Fugs. And they know each other because the Fugs were a band who took their name because you couldn't say the F word then. And in Norman Mailer's novel, Naked and Dead, everyone's fugging this and fugging fugging that. So in any case, they're all on this flatbed truck and they're trying to exercise it, the Pentagon. So I mean, even and this reversal stuff with Abbie Hoffman and the whole hippie idea, like cross at red lights. When you mean yes, say no, walk backwards. So it's like, if you, I don't know, if you probably might not know, in the old Superman comics there was Bizarro World, which is a square. It's the one it's the one place in the universe where it's a cube. And it's like, you love me, I hate you, and you give a piece of coal if you want to marry someone, and it's like, here my garbage, let's have dinner. It's just the weirdest kind of thing you could possibly. Whoever came up with that should get some kind of award. But sadly enough, it's just, I think our own time is descending into something like that.
Well, but we're still in the 1960s, Gary, and we're drawing to the close of the 1960s. There's a lot we could talk about, but I just want to bring this to a kind of conclusion, because we talked about how the origins, the genesis of this, and how it sort of then permeates the 60s, and it saturates seemingly all the popular cultures. Two events probably bring the 60s to an end, and I'm talking about Altamont and also the Manson murders. Would you see those as the kind of endpoints for where this ends up, really, in murder?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, I think it's kind of, the '60s was they were kind of a children's crusade in many ways. I mean, I think many people were actually sincere in their belief that if only, everybody loved each other, if only that. I mean, it wasn't endemic to that. In history, there's other different periods like that. But this was on a very, very wide popular scale. But it was this kind of, absolute idealism. I mean, this whole idea that something was imminent was going to happen. Saucers were going to land, Atlantis was going to rise, some big, crescendo denouement was going to take place at the end of the '60s in some way, and it did, but not what everybody thought. So yes, at the Rolling Stones' disastrous concert at Altamont, it was all about sympathy for the devil. They had the Hell's Angels again. This antinomian, Hell's Angels. Ooh, that doesn't go together. It's like the Heaven's Devils. or something like that. So Jagger thought, well, he had actually had a good experience with the nice, well-behaved British Hells Angels, who were kind of like, keeping everyone kind of, nice and calm in the Hyde Park concert they had. And then when they came to San Francisco, they somehow thought Sonny Barger and those guys, oh yeah, well, they'll be reasonable. We'll just give them a load of beer, which they did. They paid them off in some enormous amount of beer. And of course they just got, they did their own thing. They did what they wilt. And, some poor guy in the crowd starts to get uppity, and they wind up, killing him and all that. And then they start threatening the Stones, and they beat up one of the singers from the Jefferson Airplane, and all this kind of stuff happens. And I don't know if you've ever heard the recording of the Sonny Barger, the Hells Angels leader, that was on the radio after the concert, where he's explaining himself and all that. And it's one of the most bizarre sorts of things you ever hear. So, and then even though the Manson murders occurred earlier, it didn't come out until actually the new year, 1970, that Manson and the family were responsible for, the Tate LaBianca murders and Polanski. I mean, that was the whole thing too with, well, this was Rosemary's Baby, and there's his poor wife, and she's with child. And all of that, and but again, people were into the Church of Satan. Satan was fun. It was like, oh, we're getting rid of all our repressions, and this whole idea, if we only get rid, it's kind of like the Noble Savages. Just get rid of all the repressions, all the inhibitions, and all that kind of stuff, and let's just be free. Everything will be cool, and that's a lovely thought. If only that was the case, but it just didn't work. So in one sense, I think we owe them all a vote of thanks for showing us that this way doesn't work. I think Crowley shows us that, very much, because as you say, he ended up, old and a heroin addict and, poor and unknown and all of that sort of thing. So you could either see him as a martyr, or you could see him as someone, who sort of, I mean, I think he actually was quite brilliant in many ways. I think I wouldn't say he was genius, but I think he had a kind of brilliance, but he was just completely self-obsessed, oblivious to other people and all that kind of thing. So it's, if only he used his powers for good instead of evil.
Well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of this episode, Gary. Tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up copies of your books.
Well, I have a website. It's gary-lachman.com, and there you can find a lot of articles I put up, and links to my books and some information about me. And just to say, I have a new book coming out in November in the US and in January in the UK. It's called Touched by Your Presence: From Blondie's Bowery and Rock and Roll to Magic and the Occult. And it charts the story of how I went from playing rock bands and writing songs to writing the sorts of books I do.
Gary, for now, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.